following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Degraw's Yankees. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko, and the host, the man himself, the biggest Yankee fan I ever met, is right here, Jack Degraw. How you doing, Jack?
Good. How are you today, Ralph?
I really can't complain. I got to talk with one of my buddies earlier on today about, well, that was you, actually. And we talked about a show that I did with Peter Golenbach last night, and the guest was Jack O'Halloran. And he's been on the network 4 or 5, 6 times maybe in recent months. He's become a regular, and I mention this because you were nice enough to say what a terrific show it was. I think that that was his best appearance last night. It was just terrific. I posted the show. It's on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.com, so just go comfortablyzoneradio.com. You'll find us. We're on Facebook, on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher. We're all over the place. And as a matter of fact, this would be a good time to announce we are, as a network, 3 years old today. We were formed 3 years ago, and I'm so thrilled with what it's become. I implore you to find us on the internet. All of our shows are archived on YouTube. So if you go to Comfortably Zoned on YouTube, you can get any show we've ever done. They have a great search engine. And we've got like close to 2,000 offerings in 3 years, which is amazing. The quality of programming is terrific, and we are setting the standards for internet talk show. I'm very proud, and you're a big part of it, Jack, so I want to thank you for doing what you do.
Well, thank you for everything, Ralph, and congratulations. I hope you have another 3 years, and I hope you have another 33 years, and hopefully we'll all be around to talk some baseball. I'm
just living day to day. So if I get tomorrow, I'll be happy. And then I'm a greedy son of a bitch. I'm going to want the next day. But like I say, I'm happy to look back on what I've done and what we've done as a group of folks. It's terrific. So check us out on the website. Bookmark the shows you like, and share them with your friends. We want to spread the word, and our listeners can help do that. But today, we're going to talk some Yankee baseball, as is our wont, Jack and I. And we're pre-spring training. We're I think we're into 18 days, something like that, from spring.
Yeah, they'll be down the 14th. The Yankees will be down the 14th. Some of the players are down here already, so it's right around the corner.
Okay, well, so let's assume that this will be our last hot stove offering, because next week we're going to start covering them in earnest, what's going on with the farm system, and what we could hope to see in spring training. But I thought that today, because it's my contention, if the Yankees have been strong at any one position over the years, and God knows they have been at more than one position, they've been very strong. Catching is as good as it gets, and I'd like to talk with you today, Jack, about the marvelous array of catchers that the Yankees have put on the field over the years, and I'll let you kind of do your thing.
Well, the interesting thing, Ralph, it all started with like Bill Dickey come up in 1928. And from 1928 to 2011, the Yankees have had Bill Dickey, Yogi Berra, Elston Howard, Thurman Munson, and Jorge Posada for like 67 out of those 82 years. And every World Series they've won, those five guys were the catchers. And Bill Dickey started it all. You know, he hit 313 in his career. He played 17 years from 1936 through 1939. He knocked in 100 runs. In 1946, he became the Yankee manager, and him and Yogi were also teammates on the 1946 team.
You know,
and
I forget that he was actually a manager for a short period of time with the Yankees. How did that come about, and why was it so temporary?
Well, he was like 57 and 48, and he resigned because McPhail wouldn't give him an extension, and he didn't want to be a lame duck, manager. And then him and Yogi became teammates because Yogi come up in 1946 and played a few games. And then, in 1947, the Yankees hired Bucky Harris.
Yogi comes up as an outfielder, and the legendary story is that Bill Dickey taught him all he knows. Yogi had an expression for it. But Bill Dickey ends up coaching him as a catcher and made him into a fine catcher. He was a terrific quickness, and Yogi was Yogi. I mean, what can you say?
I think the thing, Ralph, a lot of people forget how good a player Yogi was. And I mean, from 1947 through 1958, Yogi averaged over 100 RBIs a year. And he also shut out other teams' running games. I mean, he threw out like 48% of the runners who ever attempted to steal against him.
Really? Whoa. I didn't know that stat. That's incredible. Yogi was the best bad ball hitter in baseball at the time. And I can't think of anybody who would, and I remember watching him at the stadium, he would Tommy Hawk a ball like nobody, ball over his head, literally. He tomahawk into right field. And, just as an ambassador to baseball, as the probably the most popular ball player that ever lived. Could a case be made for that?
Well, yeah, and another thing, Ralph, I mean, when you look at Yogi's career, now this is just my personal opinion, I'd put him up there with Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, and Mantle, because Yogi might have been the most valuable player the Yankees ever had. Because if you look at what he accomplished throughout his career, he was with DiMaggio, he was with Mantle, and they were in the World Series like 14 times over his career. I mean, it's incredible how good of a ball player he was.
He was one of the 12 or 13 players, I think it was 12, Gene Woodling and Bauer and a number of them, Phil Rizzuto, who played 5 consecutive world champions from 49 to 53. that is a team record that we will never see duplicated if we live to be 100. And Yogi was instrumental in that.
Another amazing thing, Yogi was such a good catcher. I mean, the Yankees had Sherm Lawler, Gus Triandos, Clint Courtney, Gus Nieros, and they played regular for other teams. And I mean, look at like Johnny Blanchard couldn't break the lineup, and Elston Howard was a terrific catcher too. And I mean, Yogi was so good. Ellie didn't play, like he didn't catch 100 games till he was like 31 years old.
And before Ellie, Charlie Silvera was kept on the bench for all those many years, and he never bitched, he never complained. He was getting a World Series check the whole time. But Charlie Silvera, a backup catcher, came up in San Francisco with other great future Yankees. Bobby Brown, Gil McDougall was a few years after him, but Lazari and all these guys. He was as good a prospect back then as any of these guys. He was a terrific catcher and just stayed a backup behind Yogi. An amazing career as a backup himself. And the transition, the way Casey handled the transition when Howard came up, he eased him into the starting lineup, basically over a couple of 3 years. He had him playing first a little bit, playing the outfield himself, and when he took over as the starting catcher, Yogi goes to left field and platoons with Hector Lopez, and they made a very formidable left field combination on what I think was as great a Yankee team as any that I watched growing up, and I'm an old guy, so we're talking all the 50s and later on, and that was the 61 team, and Yogi was instrumental in the outfield, kept his bat in the lineup at that time. So, and then the transition to Munson and what have you. Down the road, you want to talk about another terrific ball player, catcher. Arguably a Hall of Famer.
Munson?
Mm-hmm.
I think, Ralph, he just falls a little bit short. I mean, he was a great Yankee. He was a great ball player, but I don't think he played quite long enough. And towards the end, in 79, Thurman was getting a little beat up because they put him out in right field a little bit. And, the knees were starting to give him a lot of trouble. And, maybe, he could have played DH and played the outfield and caught a little bit. But, Thurman was clutch. And, Thurman and Posada, they had the same attributes. They were hard-nosed, and they just gave it all every day. But, when you were in a clutch situation, you wanted to see Thurman up there.
Yeah, and I don't mean to make light of what you said when the Yankees were supplying the American League with catchers. Basically, Triandas and Lawler were the two best catchers outside of Yogi and Howard in the American League.
Yeah.
For a lot of years. Lawler was tremendous with the White Sox, Triandas, the Orioles, and they were smart enough to deal the players that that couldn't keep everybody, so they're dealing players off to last place teams like Washington and what have you, so they wouldn't come back to haunt them. again, give some credit to George Weiss for an amazing ability to not only was he responsible for this, overseeing scouting and player development, what have you, but once he had the players, just knowing who to trade, who to keep, setting up that Kansas City shuttle that they had going. George Weiss was not remembered as well as Branch Rickey, for instance, but he was one of the all-time great executives. He was kind of a hard-nosed jerk in terms of, and he had a deal with the Yankees much like the Branch Rickey had with the Dodgers. It was almost like commissions. Anything he saves off the budget goes directly in his pocket. So he was very hard-nosed. The great story is he wanted to cut after Mickey's 56 Triple Crown and MVP, and he wanted everything in the world, the greatest year ever. He has kind of an off year, not an off year for anybody else, but just not a Triple Crown year. And Weiss, who was paying him like $65,000 a year in the mid-50s, which is a lot of money, yes, but by today's standards, it's tip money for these guys. And he wants to give him a pay cut. So it was every bit as much of a business back then as it is today. You talk about corporate takeover and what have you. Baseball's a business, always was.
Well, Ralph, Johnny Blanchard told me a story. Now, Johnny Blanchard come up to the Yankees in 1955. And I think Johnny was talking, the road trips are a little tough in the minor leagues. And he said Weiss called him in. He says, you don't say anything like that. You keep your mouth shut. And they didn't bring Johnny up for another 3 years. So that's how vindictive they could be.
Right. To say nothing of Vic Power. We're getting off the subject of catchers. Vic Power was incredibly talented. Probably the best fielding first baseman of our time. And I'm including a lot of guys. Wes Parker, I'm including Pepitone, Gil Hodges. They kept him in the minors for a number of years, wouldn't bring him up because he was a dark-skinned Puerto Rican or a light-skinned Puerto Rican and was married to a black woman or something crazy like that. The Yankees were every bit as racist an organization as the Red Sox. They just happened to have been lucky enough to have Elston Howard as opposed to Pumpsy Green, who wasn't as talented, and Elston Howard pushed the envelope. And that's when Sylvan came out. I think he came up in 56, and the Yankees traded Silvera to the Cubs or sold him to the Cubs at that time.
Well, one of the stories that down here, Ralph, in St. Pete area, Tampa, Vic Power went into a restaurant to eat, and the waitress and the owner come over to him and says, we don't serve blacks in this restaurant. And Power said, he goes, well, that's all right. I don't eat blacks. So, that's one of the reasons the Yankees got out of St. Pete, because of the racism down here in this area.
Oh, and the Cardinals too. The Cardinals were so discriminatory that where they stayed, Bill White and those guys, which I think I've told you the story of why the Giants, who were about to move from San Francisco to St. Pete, Bill White was the president of the National League at the time, and he remembered how St. Pete was with blacks and how blacks couldn't stay in the same hotel, and when they finally got to stay in the hotel, they couldn't swim in the pool, they couldn't eat in the dining room. St. Pete, back in the day, now you're there, my uncle lived there until the 90s when he passed away. He moved from New York and spent the 80s and 90s there, and I'd visit him, and we go to old Al Lang Field or
Great stadium. Great stadium.
We would see Instructional League down there. I remember Mark Fidridge was rehabbing in a game we saw after the Bird, and I got to see him down there. But my point is, I'm going to ask you: have things changed appreciably? Remember, Florida's the South. I mean, I know you don't think of being a Southerner. You're a Northeastern guy, New Jersey, but you're living in the South. Do you see things having changed appreciably in St. Pete, Tampa, race-wise?
Not really, Ralph. I'll tell you what I think. I think a lot of times the people in Tampa here and St. Pete, they resent the Northerners. They like their money, but there's still an old boy network down here and stuff. And I don't think it's changed that much. It's just below the surface. This is just a personal opinion, but I think they're not going to have any Northern person tell them what to do. They're going to do what they want. They don't have public transportation down here, and I didn't like what Tampa did with the Rays, because when I first come down here, all I heard was, oh, it's a terrible ballpark, the traffic is terrible, it shouldn't be in Tampa, and we seen what happened when the Rays tried to come to Tampa. They couldn't they couldn't raise the money, and the traffic is in downtown Tampa is terrible. And living in the downtown area was one of the worst experiences in my life. I'm glad I got out of there.
Oh, really? Is there, when you say no public transportation, you don't mean literally no public transportation, do you?
Well, it's like this, Ralph. They have it, but, let's put it this way. If you want to go, say, somewhere, you might leave at 8 o'clock in the morning and not get a return bus till like 4 o'clock. And, you're actually better off driving or even riding a bike. You get there quicker. And, I think if they had a transportation system, where they could get to Lakeland, you can get to Dunedin, you can get to Clearwater and stuff, I think, it's been in the works, but they really don't have anything. And, the roads down here are obsolete, and they build on every piece of property they can find. And it's just, it's hard getting around.
Yeah. Is this the ideal place for you? Are you going to end up in Tampa for the rest of your life?
No.
Okay.
I'm looking to move. I might move to the St. Pete area. That's what I'm looking to do. I got a buddy coming down, and, we might go to the St. Pete area.
Okay.
The Tampa area is great. The best thing about Tampa, Ralph, is the Yankees.
I could well imagine. You are a fanatic, and that's nice. I so much appreciate your postings on your Yankee site on Facebook. You post pictures that come out of the Yankee yearbooks of the 50s and 60s. And for me, I was a Giant fan growing up. I was 11, they move, and I lived at Yankee Stadium. I didn't root for them per se because it was like rooting for U.S. Steel. It was, but I worshiped them, and I followed them so incredibly closely, and about this time of year, spring training, I'm reminded, if you're a Yankee fan and you lived up in New York, the New York Daily News in their magazine section had, during spring training, had a picture portfolio of, in color, they called it the Roto Rougeur. There was
I remember it well.
Song. You remember that song? You'll find you're in the Roto Rougeur if I could write a sonnet about your Easter bonnet, that sort of thing. The Roto Rougeur was no more than the supplement, the magazine supplement of the Sunday papers in New York. And the Daily News had these great pictures of spring training, and I remember the early pictures of Ellie Howard next to Yogi Berra. Is just terrific. So this is an exciting time of year, spring training upon us, and Jack, what a trip it is for me to reminisce about great Yankee catchers. Who is your favorite? Aside Yogi, everybody's favorite is Yogi. Aside Yogi, who's your favorite all-time Yankee catcher?
Well, I probably a Thurman Munson, and I have a great respect for Posada, but I think Thurman is my favorite because I seen his first major league home run, and that's a memory with me from August 10th of '69. Let me see. Bobby Mercer hit a home run. The next pitch, Thurman Munson hit a home run. And 3 pitches later, Stick Michael hit a home run. So that was always a special memory with me. And, I'm glad I was able to experience.
Stick Michael's to homer, but those other 2 bums.
Well, it's funny, Ralph. I actually got Stick Michael to sign the Daily News article from that.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. And Stick was...
We're talking about 3 Yankees who are no longer with us. Very, very sad. Stick Michaels was a terrific executive with the Yankees, responsible for an awful lot more than George Steinbrenner gets the credit for a lot of stuff. But truth of the matter is, if they won in the years that he was suspended by baseball, ironically.
Well, one of the things about Stick Michael, he was also a terrific basketball player, because I read a story one time, or somebody told me a story, how Stick Michael beat Gus Johnson like 3 or 4 games in a row in one-on-one, and I brought it up to the Stick, and he got a kick out of that and stuff. But you remember Gus Johnson for the Bullets?
Oh, he was a Chicago Bull, and he was a terrific NBA basketball player. Stick beat him one-on-one. Wow.
Yeah, like 3 or 4 games in a row. So Stick was a terrific. People don't realize how good these athletes are. They're not there by accident.
No, absolutely not. They're world class, and people say, "Well, this guy's a big leaguer." I joke that Stick Michaels wasn't as accomplished as Mercer or as Munson, this, that, and the other thing. But just to get to the big leagues, just to compete in the big leagues, you probably had to go through. It was probably back in the day. There were probably 7 minor league teams for each organization, and you see the turnover in the Yankees from year to year. You had guys up there for 6-7 years. So how about these guys competing in the minors just for a chance? A guy that comes to mind when you think of under-accomplishing as a catcher is Jake Gibbs, and a 2-sport guy. That's what reminded me of him. You talk about This guy was an All-American quarterback and came up at a time when the Yankees were kind of going downhill a little bit and didn't fulfill his expectations. But a major league player, getting to the major leagues, being a world-class athlete.
Jake's a Hall of Famer in college football. He's a Hall of Fame college football quarterback, Jake Gibbs.
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss.
Yep. So that's a perfect example of what you're talking about, that these players are not only great in baseball oft times, but other sports. We talked about Bob Gibson with St. Louis. That name came up earlier. He was a Harlem Globetrotter.
Yeah.
A great basketball player. Creighton, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, one thing I love about you, Jack, is that you have what I have, and that's a respect for these guys that shines through. Let's put it that way.
Well, I mean, the thing is, Ralph, it's always like a lot of fun to go over and watch, the minor leaguers because, it's very inspirational. They're trying to improve their life and, get better and, they have a lot of passion. So it's always a lot of fun to, be around that. And most of the kids and all the ones I've met with the Yankees, except maybe one or two exceptions, are all terrific people. I mean, they're really worth cheering for.
Good. And you pick out your favorites and you get to communicate with them a little bit more than you will after they reach the majors. You can say what you want, but the situation changes a person. If you live in a gated community and you're making $15 million a year, it's going to be difficult it's going to be difficult to get access to these guys, if nothing else. Even if they want to communicate, they can't. So you're living a dream.
One of the stories, Ralph, I like Dylan Betances. I remember him in the minors. And I used to give Dylan, like, passes to come up to the gym. And, I told him, he asked me, could you teach me how to shoot a basketball and stuff like that? And it's funny, I see him at spring training, and, he'll say, the next year goes, how you doing, Jack? So he's a great kid. I mean, and the thing is, Ralph, as you get older, you look at these guys, and they're just like kids. You know what I mean? It's like they're baby-faced. And I like people will be yelling, he stinks, he's no good. And then you get up next to him, it's like you're yelling at your grandson or something.
Exactly. I will close by talking about Johnny Blanchard when they told him he was traded to Kansas City. He cried. It's a grown man crying. The pinstripe so much to these guys.
Joe Collins, too.
Right. Collins refused to play anywhere else.
Yeah.
And another guy who died young. Solid first baseman. Wasn't quite as good as some of his teammates in that 5-year streak, 49 to 53, but he was one of those that platooned with Johnny Mize. Didn't really platoon. They were both left-handed hitters, but kind of split the position, and he's remembered as a Yankee fan, as a longtime Yankee worshiper by me. Let me put it to you. He was one of those guys that everybody looked to in the clubhouse for leadership. Especially with DiMaggio retiring and Mantle and Martin coming in and Whitey Ford, these young guys. Yogi wasn't much of a disciplinarian, as Phil Linz might tell you. He didn't really take over the clubhouse like Joe Collins did. He very underrated guy and what he meant to the Yankees in those years. So Hey, this is great. Thank you so much, Jack, for communicating with me and making it a great Yankee broadcast or podcast on the network. Jack?
Well, call anytime you want, Ralph. It's always great to talk baseball or any sport. So, thanks for all the opportunities. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you for doing it. I appreciate it. And next time we do a show, it's going to be what's coming up for spring training, and we'll really give it an in-depth coverage at that time.
Sounds good, Ralph. I'm going to call for my Yankee tickets right as soon as I get off the phone. So thanks for everything.
What a pleasant way to spend time on the phone, I'm sure for you.
Well, except for the money part, it'll be fantastic.
Yeah, well, outside of that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? Money has taken over. I'm sure you remember when you first got to spring training what the cost of a spring training ticket was, and now that it's commercialized and an industry in itself, what are some of those prices?
Well, the thing is, Ralph, you know what I do? I buy a bunch of games, and then if I sell 2 or 3 tickets, I could probably get in for like $15 a piece, which isn't bad. But I think the one thing that gets me, that tells me the end times is coming, I used to go over to the Yankee minor league complex, and I would pick up, I had thousands of baseballs. And now people last year were picking up home run balls from the practice, and they were coming out, Yankee, like the security, and say, you have to give the balls back or we're going to have you arrested.
We could do a podcast on what teams are doing to the fans. That's horrible. That's horrible.
Oh, well, I'm glad I could get that in, Ralph. Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Jack. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, Degraw's Yankees, one of my favorites. Be well, my friend. I'm Ralph Tyko. As I say, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Adios.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you for listening. Thank you, Jack. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.